All right, it's about 12:30, so it's time to get started. Thank you all for being here. I'm Kristen Body, the Membership and Museum Events Manager at the Asheville Art Museum. Today's member program is being led by local glass artist Alex Bernstein, and many of you have probably seen one of his works, Ice Meadow, in the museum's atrium when you've visited, and I hope you enjoy hearing more about his art and artistic practice today. But before I turn this over to Alex and show you a video, I just want to go over some housekeeping for all our attendees. First, microphones are muted and video is off by default. Please note that we are recording today's program, so if you prefer not to be recorded, I recommend that you leave both of these off. And you can see that by the microphone and camera symbols in the bottom left-hand corner, which should have red lines through them. And this recording will be shared in tomorrow's museum e-blast. And next, you do have two ways to ask questions or make comments. The first is to type your question or comment into the chat box, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. And I encourage you to ask questions as you go. Alex will be reading them throughout the presentation. And the second option is to use the raise hand feature, which you'll find by clicking the participants button at the bottom of your screen. And when there's time, I'll call on anyone with a raised hand, unmute your audio so you can speak directly to Alex. And finally, if you feel that there's anything we can do to improve these Zoom programs, please do let us know. I'll send out an evaluation after this program is over, so you could share your feedback that way, or you can feel free to email me directly. So thanks again for being here. And now I am going to just start with a brief video that you can find on Alex's website. So just give me one moment to stop the share here and share a different screen.
Grinding the sparks onto the glass makes this opaque surface, and what happens is the steel actually becomes permanently adhered to the glass, and that's actually nowadays known as Bernsteining. And when people say Bernsteining, they mean apply the steel surface, which is basically shooting sparks directly onto the glass. My name is Alex Bernstein. I'm a glass artist born and raised in Western North Carolina. My studio is here in Asheville, North Carolina. I've been doing glass sculpture for most of my life. Both my parents are glass artists. To me, glass is a magical material. You literally take sand, like you see at a beach, and you can put it in a furnace. You add a couple other ingredients, and you can melt and make it into this molten material. From that molten material, you can basically shape it into anything. You can make glass that looks like wood. You can make glass that looks like stone and shaped finest crystal. And it truly is a magical material. I'm a glass caster technically, which means I put glass in molds in an oven. My oven goes up to 1700 degrees and the glass melts. And then it cools. Some of my pieces maybe will take a month, maybe even 2 months to cool slowly. I have to cool slowly. Then I take the glass out of the oven and I cut and I carve and sculpt it. Really, my creative process comes through more like a stoneworker. I'm using subtractive sculpting. I literally take a chisel and I'll chisel away my pieces. That means I'm kind of mid-career. I still kind of feel like I'm just getting started and have have so many ideas to explore, and you know, I'm generally excited to see where I'll go. I want to see something I've never seen before. I want to see something that I think is totally new and different. I feel like I'm the luckiest person I know. I do something that I truly, not just like, I love working in my studio. I love what I do. I feel like mental health is very much related to your hands, using your hands to work and to do things. And I'm really lucky that I get to come in, use my hands, and physically make objects. I feel like being an artist is what I was really meant to do.
Okay. So you guys can watch that video again. I think it maybe came through a little low quality, but Alex has that up on his website, which was on that screen, and along with some other videos that you all might enjoy. But now let me turn this over to Alex and I'll pull up his presentation.
Hi guys, it's so nice to be here. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. If you can't hear me, I know there's a little message. You can send me a message, which I guess is another note. I'm gonna, basically the format is I'm going to do a little, what we used to call slide talks back in the old days when we used to use actual slides, but this is a PowerPoint. So if you have questions, feel free to send me through the messenger. But basically what I'm gonna do is go through chronologically about my parents, about my work, and then up to current. And then I also added a little bit of how I do what I do, and then also what future plans are. So I'm going to try to go through this in, I think, about 30 minutes. So if I'm lagging on and getting boring, please send me a message to say, hurry up, Alex. I will try to keep things moving. Can everybody see the screen okay?
Yeah, and I apologize. It doesn't seem to be going full screen on here, even though it is on my computer. So you guys will get a little preview of the slides to come.
Okay, so it's gonna stay like this. Is there a way I can fix this? View on. Be nice if we could get it full screen. I guess it's okay. We can just keep going. Is that okay? So you guys will be able to see the preview of the image before. Should I just go ahead and start? Okay. Let me keep up. Okay, so this is me at my parents' studio when I was roughly 8 years old. Again, I know you already found this out, but both my parents, William Bernstein and Catherine Bernstein, are glass artists. And I'm not sure if you can see in this image, but if you look closely, there's a propane torch and 2 pieces of glass that I'm actually melting together. I'm a father and I have an 8-year-old, and I can't imagine giving my son Max glass and a blowtorch and saying, have fun, here you go. But I think back then, maybe things were a little more liberal about letting your kids play. But again, this is me. So you can do the math, but I've basically, with this picture as reference, been doing glass for 40 years. This is one of my mom. Oh, actually, could you change the slide? Are you there?
Yes, I apologize. There must be some technical difficulties. It is changing on my screen. There we go.
Okay. Is there something I should say to change it, or is it okay just to say change slide?
Just say change slide, that's fine.
This is one of my mom's sculptures, Catherine Bernstein. She does cast glass. This is actually a sculpture of, I believe it was my brother with a babysitter. My mom, her work is very sincere. It's very much about her everyday life. So growing up, she would always say stillsies, which meant we had to sit still so she could do a drawing of us. And then from that drawing, she would do a sculpture. So this is, again, cast lead crystal. Next, please. Oh, interesting. It showed that slide, even though it's hidden. This is a collaborative piece that I did with my mother. So I did the cutting and carving that's on the background, and it's very interesting process to collaborate with your mother. But so far, we've been really successful. So it's a really good way to communicate. This is one of my father's pieces. This is a blown piece, and he basically does it at the furnace. So all the color you see is actually glass that's melted in hot. So a piece like this would mean he would have to stand close to the furnace for probably 6 or 8 hours, just melting in different colors of glass. So there's no painting or pigment. It's all done hot. It's melted in. And perhaps you guys have seen my parents' work at Ariel Gallery. Next slide, please. Okay, this is, maybe some people have noticed it. This is their collaborative work. So my parents make work together. These are the goblets that they've became somewhat well known for. They used to sell these at Saks Fifth Avenue and kind of all over the world. People are messaging me that they have them in their kitchen cabinet and whatnot. So yes, they these face goblets have been around quite a bit. Next slide, please. So from an early age, I thought that glass meant that if I wanted to make a living, this isn't early, this is more like in my 20s, that I had to do production. Production means I would send work to a gallery and they said, okay, send me 10 more of these. And then I'd send them 10 more of basically the same thing, as opposed to one of a kind. So it was pretty early in my career that I got orders for things and had to remake things that I realized that I didn't really love doing production, as in making the same things over and over. So next slide. So it was pretty soon after that experience of getting orders and filling these orders and the frustration that is, that I really like creating one-of-a-kind artwork. This is a sculpture that I made. There's a beautiful river, which actually my son Max and I were at yesterday, called the South Toe River, that is right next to my parents' studio. So I made this piece at my parents' studio and then gathered these stones and made this one-of-a-kind sculpture. Next slide, please. So this is building from that. This sculpture is about 3 feet tall. So again, from blown glass and then working more sculptural. Next, please. Right around then, I should back up that I actually went to UNC Asheville and I studied psychology, and I spent 3 years working at a psychiatric hospital with children. So I did that at UNCA, and then the artwork that you saw kind of came after undergrad. And then I decided to go to graduate school. This is RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. It's not known for the architecture. If you look at this, it's just a bunch of big blocks. So when I got there, I was like, oh, what is this? It was also my first taste of wintertime. I was born and raised in Spruce Pine, North Carolina. I'd really never experienced what a true winter is. Rochester, New York, it was something different for sure. So next, please. At this time, I'd become a really skilled glass blower, and blowing glass is one of those things where it's almost like being a runner. You can train yourself and become really, really good at it. But just because you're a really, really good glass blower doesn't mean necessarily that you love or that you have really good ideas. So when I went to graduate school, every piece I made was based on glass blowing. Every assignment I made was based on glass blowing, because it was my crutch. It was what I could lean on because I was a really good glass blower. And so everything I did was related to blowing glass. Early in that, all my teachers and faculty said, so what? You can blow glass, that doesn't matter. We're here to figure out good ideas. So I had this kind of, this friction between glass blowing was all I knew, but I had other ideas. So I started to, excuse the term, but kind of destroy the vessels. So this is my first attempt at destroying the vessel, but it wasn't really destroying the vessel particularly, although literally I was in this piece. It was more about working through the struggle of knowing that my ideas weren't going to be clearly expressed through glass blowing, and I maybe had to find something else to do. Next slide. So this is even a little more extreme. This was a perfectly blown glass vessel first, and which is very difficult. Then I took the perfectly blown vessel as it was still hot, and I wrapped it with this copper wire that you can see, and then actually stretched it and pulled it out to make this shape. So again, somewhat kind of killing the vessel. which again was this frustration that I had inside, that every assignment I would do would just be from the vessel, but yet I didn't feel like the vessel was a great way for me to express my ideas. Next, please. Right around that time, I was, going through, I think it was halfway through my first year of graduate school. I was lucky enough to go to the Czech Republic, and I met this guy, František Janák. This is one of his sculptures. And I'd really never seen cast glass. I mean, what my mom does, I'd seen that, but I'd never seen this beautiful colored glass. And what I realized in the Czech Republic, which I'm not sure if you know the history, but glass casting kind of started in the Czech Republic. And so this is one of the, this is one of František's pieces, but it's a good example of what Czech glass can do. So next slide, please. So this is one of the first pieces I made with glass casting. And basically I was teaching myself how to cast glass. It turns out that František Janák was able to come to RIT as a visiting professor. So I was able to actually learn this style of Czech casting directly through him. What you find is with this Czech glass, it has this almost like a soul. It glows from within. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with my work or with Czech glass in general. It kind of glows. What I was doing is making blown glass vessels. I was making them so thin and perfect that they almost looked like plastic. But then when I started to look at the material itself and how it can glow and move, it really was like a door opening for me. Again, this piece is somebody who's asking about titles. I'll try to remember some of the titles of these as I go. This piece is called Betty's Fight, and it actually is in the permanent collection of the Corning Museum of Glass. The concept was this woman, Betty Oliver, who is this amazing poet and sculptor from New York City, was dying from cancer. And so I made this piece as a tribute to her, and the inside kind of being the cancer kind of corroding. But I was trying to make narrative work. And so instead of using the vessel, using cast glass. Next image, please. This piece is called Slate. And again, basically just teaching myself how to cast glass. Similar to how my mom works, I went out to this place called Letchworth Park in somewhere outside of Rochester. And it's basically like a mini Grand Canyon, but it has slate. The whole walls are slate. And then there's this beautiful river that flows through the middle. So I'm not trying to make a representational work, but be inspired by what I see. So this piece was inspired by this beautiful city park, or it wasn't a city park, but a country park called Letchworth Park. Next, please. I think this piece is called Amber Slice. Excuse me, it's one of the first sculptures that I really started using subtractive sculpting methods, as in taking away. So I would cut and carve and grind away a lot of material to kind of express the inner soul of the piece. So this glass actually was very dark, almost totally black. No light could get through it at all until I started. It started as a really big block. And then as I started to cut, it was almost like this sunset just started to appear through this piece. And it was meaningful. And as you'll see, my work is really this idea of being a glass sculptor, but I work with subtractive methods, much like a stone sculptor. So this was kind of a big, important step for me to realize that I could cut and carve the sculpture. Next slide, please. This is a Cleveland Institute of Art. So right out of graduate school, I got a job teaching. My mom said, "Yay, you got a job, this is great." So I was pretty excited to get a job in academics right out of graduate school. And really for me, I knew that I wanted to make artwork, but I also didn't know how I was going to ever make a living doing that. So I felt like academics would be the best route. And graduate school, the MFA that I got is what you would teach with at a university level. So I was really excited. It still have memories of my first Monday morning, my 9 o'clock class with a room filled with 28 freshmen that are all basically 18 years old, and going, "Oh man, what do I do with these 18-year-olds?" So it was a great learning experience. And again, like I said, my mom was super happy I got a job, and it was a perfect spot for me because I was able just to pursue my work and teach. Next image, please. Again, very similar to my mom. I was making work that was about my everyday experience. Remember the piece Letchworth Park, where I was going out to parks and hanging out. This time in my life, all I was doing is making art and teaching. So this piece actually has quite a few design elements in it, and I was teaching a 2D, 3D design class. So I was using those basic design elements to incorporate it in my work. Again, kind of like what my mom did. What you do during the day is what you're gonna make work about later that evening when you get to your studio. And often if I'm in a crowded room, I ask people to tell me what design elements they see. I'll spare you with that, but you can see there's line, and then there's also proximity. These are two separate pieces, and how you put them, which is another principle, and then balance. So I was thinking of these design principles as I was making this. Next image, please. This piece, again, design principles, it was talking about repetition of line, and with repetition of line, you can actually get a rhythm. So I think this piece is called Rhythm. So again, using what I learn every day, teach in class, and then I would go to the studio and go, oh, remember I was teaching my students about this idea of a repetition of a line. You can make a sort of rhythm, and like music, you can have rhythm in sculpture. And so I was trying to take that rhythm into this piece. Another note is that I was also, this is lead crystal. I actually got a grant for from the American Craft Council to buy this optical lead crystal. And so I was using this. It might not mean too much to you if you don't know a whole lot about glass, but optical lead crystal is the clear stuff that really has a higher clarity. The problem was I was polishing it, which is a laborious process. And so it takes a very, very long time to polish it. And I would get an idea and then have to see it through, and it would take such a long time to get to that idea. I started to get frustrated in the process. Next image, please. So here I am using optical lead crystal, this beautiful material that's used for lenses, and it's perfectly clear and white and just beautiful. And on this one, this piece is actually a solid block. What you're seeing, the name is called Solid Empty. The interior, again, is solid, but it almost looks like stair steps that you can walk through it. This was a piece I almost specifically designed. So the only part that I had to actually physically polish, which again is the part that's very difficult, is the front and the back. So if you went and you tapped on the piece, the front would be solid. Does that make sense? Next image, please. Okay, so this piece, again, built on my frustration of process. I mean, there's one thing if you don't love your process, but you're getting the results you want, then that's probably okay. But also if you're being lazy and just don't like the process. So there's a fine line between being lazy and then the passion. I'm not sure if you can tell, but I'm a pretty passionate person and pour a lot of energy into my artwork. And so because the piece was 2 months before it was finished, my passion would slow down for the piece. So this was another breakthrough piece. This piece is roughly, I know some people have asked about dimensions. I apologize, I can't get to the keyboard fast enough. But this piece is roughly 20 inches by I think 7 or 8. And it was 2 inches thick. And again, this piece was optical lead crystal. And what I had done, I wish I had an image of it before, is I actually had totally polished the sculpture. And so it was 2 inches thick, totally polished. But you guys may guess what totally polished, perfect lead crystal looks like when you look through it. It disappears. So you imagine a window is perfectly clear. You look through it and you can't even see it. This sculpture actually did much like that. Once it was perfectly polished, it disappeared. I remember vividly leaving my studio, looking back at the sculpture I just finished and said, wait, where is it? I couldn't even see it on the pedestal because it disappeared because it was so clear. I went back to my grinding table and I started grinding with my grinder, a much rougher grit, and made it this white. So I basically undid a month's worth of work because the piece disappeared and then it turned into this nice white satin. And then all of a sudden I could see the shape again. Next image. I left the inside. So this is the edge of the piece. I left that part polished. So it gave this kind of surprise, and it gave this, this passageway, again, this idea of traveling, that you could walk into the sculptures. So having something that was a big risk as in taking a sculpture that was perfect that I'd spent too much making and then undid it all by grinding back over it, ended up being a big breakthrough. I know there's, you know, the kind of cheesy thing, no risk, no reward, that kind of idea, but this was literally like stuff I couldn't sleep at night. He's like, I have to do something. And then I came in and did this, and it worked out. Some things I do don't work out, so it's not always that successful. Next image, please. So this is another image using optical lead crystal. And thank you all for the comments, by the way. It's a little hard for me to talk and type, so I'll try to answer some of these in a little while, but thank you for the compliments. This piece is, I think it weighs about 100 pounds. And these are optical blocks of lead crystal. Do you see any optics? No. So basically I denied the optics of all this lead crystal, but it came out with quite a, I think a strong sculpture. This is one of my favorite pieces. And it's in a collector of some really wonderful, loving collectors and I'm so happy that they have it. This piece, again, like my mom, was about another park, speaking of Letchworth Park, but this was about going to these parks in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm somewhat athletic and like to run and try to stay fit. And again, this Cleveland winter there was these parks and they had all these waterfalls and all this beautiful stuff. Turns out it gets cold in Cleveland and it stays cold for a very long time. So all these waterfalls that I used to run by were frozen. So I made this piece called Icefall. And these blocks of steel, you saw the video where I talk about the steel, the blocks of steel represent the Rust Belt. When I moved to Cleveland, Ohio for the job, they said, welcome to the Rust Belt. And I kind of said, what does that mean? And so I didn't really know. But then after I learned about the Rust Belt, I moved on to this. Several people have asked if things are available and where they're on display. Most all of the earlier work is in collections, some museums, some private collections. I don't think anything that I showed. I do have some pieces at my studio, but not a whole lot. And after Corona, I'm happy to show people around my studio. I have a studio right on Riverside Drive in Asheville, but closer to UNCA. And when Corona resolves and I can have people over, I'd be happy to show people around my studio. Next image, please. So after Cleveland, I got a job in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I got a job as a department head, so it was a big step up, but it ended up being a much more of an administrative job and much less actually making my work and working with students. Next image, please. There wasn't any casting equipment in the studio when I first got there in Worcester, Mass. But I had a palette filled with glass blocks, these colorful blocks. And so I gave myself assignments of basically making these little, kind of called them mini-me's, these little miniature sculptures, small scale, but just using the blocks that I had available and cutting and carving and fabricating. But again, another life lesson is this something that I took further once I got my kilns working and everything working. These, I had students in Worcester and they used to joke that because I moved to Worcester, I literally knew no one there. My brother lived in Cambridge, but that was about an hour away. But other than that, I knew no one. And so they said, oh, you're making little friends to talk to? Because I was caught a couple times talking to these sculptures in my studio on my own, virtually making glass friends. So next image, please. This is just a close-up of one of those. And this is roughly the size of the block. The blocks are, I can't remember exactly. I think 8 by 10, maybe 12 by 10 inches. So relatively small, but what it really taught me is how to fabricate glass. I have a block, that's my blank slate. What can I carve out of that? And yes, I do. I have a question here that I do have work at Blue Spiral Gallery downtown, and actually I've been working with them pretty closely recently, and they're great people. And if you know Blue Spiral, John Cram, who owns Blue Spiral, worked with my parents 30, 40 years ago. And I've known John Cram since I was a little kid. So it's really fun to be working with Blue Spiral. Next image, please. This is when I first got kiln working. So these are a little bit bigger, but still small. This is a diptych, and I really liked how these two pieces were, I like how they were talking to each other, like having this conversation. Again, remember I was saying I was kind of talking to myself, so I was making these sculptures talk to each other. I have a question of how do I introduce the color? The color actually at this point is the blocks of glass that I purchased or had available are monochromatic, as in they're one color, but I adjust the color and can play with the color by making the piece thick or thin and changing the texture. And then in a couple slides, I'll talk about something a little bit different. I'm gonna try to pick up the pace a little bit too, because I'm a little worried about time. So just let me know how I'm doing, if this is too fast or too slow, but I'm gonna try to a little bit faster. This piece is called Coral. So this is a relatively large piece, and you can see that means I got my ovens working. I can't remember exactly how big this is, but I wanna say it's 30 inches tall by 40 inches wide. So definitely larger. Thank you. Next, please. This is called Monocot, and this piece I think is about 36 inches tall. Next image, please. This piece, so you're asking about color, which was a good question to ask. This piece is using Bullseye Glass, which is a brand of glass. Bullseye is a company in Portland, Oregon that specifically makes glass just for the artists. So what I don't want to get too tied in on chemistry, but basically with glass, you can't mix different colors together or the glass will crack and break. Bullseye, and now there's a few other companies that have developed a way with lots of testing, and it's very difficult to have where you can actually mix colors together. And the glass is what's called compatible, which means that you can use different colors. So this piece was the breakthrough. The glass is really expensive, probably generally speaking, at least $10 a pound. So you think, you know, I don't know how much coffee is a pound, but it's more than coffee costs a pound. And for a struggling, starting out artist, this was a big expense for me to take. Lonnie McGregor, who owns Bullseye Factory, or Bullseye Glass, really loved my work and really wanted me to use their work. And I said I couldn't afford it. And then literally a month later, a big pallet of Bullseye Glass showed up at my studio. And so this is one of the first pieces I made with that. She's also really, really smart. As in, I've been buying Bullseye Glass forever now. So she was very kind and thoughtful, and that was super nice, but also she knew that she would get a customer. This piece is actually in the collection of the Museum of Fine Art in Boston, which I was very excited about that. Do I have a vision of what the piece will look like before I start? That's a really good question. I do a lot of drawings and sketches, but often I don't take a sketch from a sketchbook and go and make the exact piece. I cast blocks of glass, and then I cut and carve them in the general shape, and sometimes I have to go with the flow and just see how things are going. And sometimes the glass will say, I don't want to do that, which means it breaks or cracks or just doesn't work right. And I have to kind of let the glass tell me what it wants to do. But I typically have a pretty good idea of what I'm doing. Excuse me, but I forgot to mention that, or maybe I mentioned it. At the end of the slide talk, if we have time, I do have like literally how I make my work, images of exactly how I make it. So if we have enough time for that, hopefully I can get to that. Next image, please. Anyone recognize this? So after I think about 3 years in Worcester, as any great story goes, I met a girl. So I met my wife, Jessica Bernstein, who happens to be a city planner. And she said, oh, there's a job in Asheville, North Carolina. I wonder if I should apply for it. And at that point, my career was going really, really well. And the teaching, I was kind of reaching a burnout level. It wasn't even the teaching, I was mainly doing administrative work, working with the budget a lot and doing a lot of faculty meetings and things that maybe I didn't love as much. And again, my career was going really well. And I said, well, I think I can probably live anywhere. So again, I met Jessica Bernstein. Obviously, you know, I'm in Asheville, so there's no punchline to the story anymore. But because she got this job, she was able to kind of be the impetus that got us the motivation to move back to Asheville. Yeah, next slide, please. This is the inside of my studio. Like I said, my studio is right on Riverside Drive. It was a former pool hall, and then now it is my studio. These images are from basically when I finished the build out. So it's not quite as clean as it used to be, but I try to keep it pretty clean. And again, when Corona is resolved, I would love to show people around. I don't really have any signs and don't really advertise it as being a place that's open, but I'm always happy to show people around. Next image, please. This is one of the first pieces I started when I moved to Asheville. This is called a Seedpod, stone burst sculpture. And Jessica and I bought our new house here, and we started a very little garden. And I, again, like my mom, see what's happening with my everyday life, working in the garden. I saw these plants grow, and we actually had bought some bulbs from our neighbor's daughter who was doing a fundraiser for her school, and these flower bulbs, and I never really thought about it. And this beautiful flower grows out of this bulb. So I was trying to recreate that. Again, not trying to make representational work, but that idea of a plant or a flower growing out of a bulb. How many pieces do I make before I have something I like? Good question. I used to lose a lot of the work that I made. I would make something and it would crack and break, or it just wouldn't turn out right. I definitely am getting much better, and my process lends itself where I can continue to evolve it, because it's subtractive sculpture. If something isn't working out, then I'll just keep changing it and keep changing it. It may end up being like an inch tall by the time I'm done because I'm changing it. But most stuff, hopefully I'm somewhat happy with it. And the cracking and breaking, I've dialed that in. It still happens. If glass was easy, I probably wouldn't like working with it as much. It's a very challenging material. But so I've got it dialed in. I still have issues. But what I do, and again, not getting too deep on the science, but it's called annealing the glass, which I slowly cool it. So I figured out a way that I anneal it really, really well for a very long time. So the glass itself is really stable, so I don't lose things as often. Next image, please. This is another version. I should also note that in between, I'm just showing a few images of different series. So I started kind of working in series, as in there's quite a few different shapes, colors, and forms of a sculpture similar to this. They're all unique and 100% one of a kind, but I'm showing you 2 examples, but I probably made 30 different Seedpod series, and always trying to make something better on the next one. Next image, please. So this is Bullseye Glass. Again, this idea of Bullseye, you can tell because it has multiple colors. So at this time I was using some Bullseye Glass and some from a different supplier. So the idea again is growth, but this time on the outside surface, you can see almost like vines growing up the side. So I was thinking about the growth, but these pieces have windows where you can actually look inside. So trying to exploit the fact that glass has this ability to have the interior space. Next image. So another one from that series. And then next image, please. So now I'm, again, just trying to be aware of the time. I actually added a little bit out of the timeline, just several pieces that what I call relatively new. This piece is actually currently in my studio and just finished it. Often people ask me what's next and what's new. So I'm gonna go through a few slides that I consider current. Then the next batch of slides are going to be of inspiration, things I look at, and then I'll have how-to, but I'm gonna do all that. What do I have, 11 minutes left, or like 21 minutes left? So I'm gonna do that all real quick. So hang in there. All right, next image. This is another one from my Half Moon series. I loved the little wisp of color in the middle. Next one, please. Thank you. This is a triptych. And this piece is really great. I actually have a video of me walking around it. You can check on my website, alexbernsteinglass.com, I think is my site. But this piece is really amazing. As you walk around it, it turns into all these different colors because it makes this prism effect. Yes, and the fact is, someone asked, I guess you can all read these questions, so I don't need to reread them, but depending on the light, glass changes dramatically. I have nice windows in my studio, western facing, and it's sometimes very hard to recreate that when I bring it inside a gallery, because having a window, even a window 20 feet away, makes the glass just glow. So yes, it does change and evolve, and this triptych for sure. Next image, please. This is just another one, kind of this repetition of line, and this is just happens to be one of my favorite colors. It's so almost feels alive. Next, please. Another half moon. These colors, speaking of colors that change, is just absolutely drastic, the difference that it looked. And this piece is actually in a collection in Florida. I had it in my studio with natural light. It looked amazing. We brought it to a gallery and I was talking to someone about it, and I said, you're gonna have to trust me, it's gonna look much better with natural light, because they had lots of spotlights on it, but the piece just didn't look right. And then sure enough, I can send you guys an image of it. In her home, it looks better than it looked in my studio, but natural light just made the piece really glow. That is an issue with glass, and especially with photographing it. And often what I find is my photographer can't quite recreate how beautiful natural light is. Next, please. Okay, just another one. I really loved how this was kind of icy. Next, please. Okay, so now we're moving into inspiration or source images. Source as in what is my source for creating? What do I look at? I'll be honest that it's not like I look around at images and say, okay, I'm gonna go create this piece. I think it comes from more of my my memories. You know, it's not like I look at a magazine and say, oh, I want to go make that, but this forms my thoughts, my history, my memory, and this is from the idea of a seed pod. So this is something growing out of a seed. Next image. This is literally one of my sculptures outside in the rain. You saw the video about my fused steel method called Bernsteining. And to patina it, to rust it, sometimes the best is having it outside in the rain. So this wasn't a prop just to take a good image. This piece actually was sitting outside, so it would get rained on, so the steel would patina. And obviously, or at least obvious to me, this piece is very much about nature, like grass growing. And the fact is this rusty steel is a natural phenomenon. So I really like the fact that my work is about a natural phenomenon, and it actually is currently going through a phenomenon. Does that make sense? It's like my work, I don't usually seal it when it has a steel, so it's literally continuing to go through a natural effect. I can seal them. I have clients like, I don't want it to change, and I can spray a sealant on it or paint a sealant on it, but I like to let it actively continue to rust. And I do have some pieces that have been in my studio for 5-10 years, and they will start to rust, especially if they're close to the bathroom and they get water on them or something like that. I kind of like that idea. This piece is, can't remember exactly, but I think it's about 22 inches tall by 14 inches wide. Next image, please. So this is just a finished piece. The other one was with it on the outside rusting. So this is the finished patina, and it probably looks different now. Yes, you can go to the next one. So this is St. Lucia. Again, not as literal as I go home and make the exact piece, but inspired by sunsets. In fact, Jessica and I are under contract for a new house, and one of the reasons we're under contract for this new house is A, because my son's disabled and we want an accessible house, but B, it has really nice views of the mountains and light, because I find a lot of inspiration. This house needs a lot of renovation, so please cross your fingers and send good vibes my way, because I've never done that before and it's very scary, especially in this time, but hopefully it's gonna be a nice spot that will lead to lots of inspiration. So next image, please. So this is a piece, again, just inspired by a sunset. Next, please. And we can, gotta keep moving. So I'll keep next one. This is Mexico. Again, I guess it seems like I like to travel a lot, thankfully. Max, my 8-year-old son, loves going to the beach, so we find ourselves as often as possible. Although with Corona, we haven't been able, we've had to cancel quite a few trips, which is okay. But he has mentioned often, I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. So hopefully sometime soon. Next image, please. So again, the piece wasn't necessarily about the trip to Mexico. It's just that color of the sunlight. Next, please. Another one with kind of the idea of sunset. Next, please. Coral. You can just keep moving, please. So this is this piece. I mean, I think this one very much looks like the coral. People often ask if I'm inspired by underwater or ocean type things. I love going to the ocean. I've never really done scuba diving, so I wouldn't say literal, but somehow it comes through my, it always seems to come out of making things that look like they're from underwater. But the next image, please. This is the Dolomite Mountains, which is my larger inspiration. So I feel like I'm more inspired by mountains, which is obviously where we all live. So this is a piece inspired by that. So this is a Monet painting. This is a little more about the color pattern. Next image, please. So this piece is, I know we talked a little bit about the mixture of color. This is Bullseye Glass, and it comes in what's called frit, which is basically like a popcorn kernel, or I guess I could just say a corn kernel. So basically the size of a corn kernel, but it comes in lots of different colors, and I literally use my hand or a cup and I can mix all the different colors together, very much like a painter. And I think this piece turned out, I'm not gonna say it looks like a Monet painting, but it reminds me of pointillism in that style of painting. On the next image, please. I think that's just a close-up. Okay, this is another same kind of idea of mixing these colors. This is just another example. This color we're gonna see again, one of my favorite colors. It's called Neodymium, the kind of purple color, and it literally drastically changes color depending on what kind of light. Sunlight and overhead light, it goes from blue to purple. So it's really amazing the different colors that that it'll produce, and it's really like magic. I mean, glass, not to be too poetic, but I think glass is pretty magical. And seeing kids see glass blowing and things, that's obvious, but these colors to me are really pretty amazing. Next image, please. Just another detail. So all the little bubbles you see are where these corn kernels or popcorn kernels melt together, and it traps these little air bubbles. But what that does is the air bubbles actually trap light, so it makes the pieces glow and sparkle. And I do that, I kind of mix these blocks of glass, which are billets, and this frit, which is like the small popcorn, to get different visual effects. Next image. So the Northern Lights. Next image, please. You can see that this is, again, not really literally inspired by, but I think this piece definitely, to me, speaks to that. You guys, as viewers, may have very different histories and may see something totally different. But as you remember, I was a psychology major in undergrad, and I love people's perceptions. I love to see what people think about my work. Sometimes people see exactly what I see, and sometimes they don't. And I love to hear feedback of what people think my work looks like. Next. So same basic color, just done in a different principle. Crystals, natural crystals is something I think I'm going to talk about a little bit more, so we can just keep moving through these. Yeah, you can keep moving. Another crystal. This is just texture and sand. So maybe if you could go back. Yeah, so this is texture and sand. And this is something that I remember even as a kid, looking around at quite a lot, going, wow, look at the ripple effect from the wind or the water. And then creating, okay, the next image, please. To me, these are landscapes like lakes. Again, it's abstract to me, but I thought of these pieces as like water in the mountains or stones around them is what I was intending to make them look like. Again, it may look like something else to you, but that the idea of a lake. And I think I have a few more of these. Next one, please. Oops, I have 2 of those. So another from the lake series. That blue is just amazing. Again, see, glass is just unbelievable. Sometimes I am often surprised by my artwork. And sometimes, I'll just sit there and take pictures and look at it and then come home to Jessica and be like, oh, you wouldn't believe this piece. That's just so amazing. And it sounds narcissistic and weird to say that about my own work, but it's not me, it's the material. So sometimes for sure glass does things that I never knew would exist. I do try to push the limits and do weird things with it, and often it doesn't work out, but sometimes it does. Could you step back 1 slide, please? There you go. Another picture of the Dolomite Mountains. This was a big deal. I know I have 10 more minutes, and I'm gonna try to get you guys out just on time, so hang tight. This is, if you've never been to the Dolomites, they're probably some of the most amazing mountains I've ever seen. I am a bike rider, a cyclist, and I was invited to be a guest rider on a German cycling team to do a bike race in the Dolomite Mountains. And I'd never been there, and so I was on this team of a bunch of Germans, and I was riding, and everywhere I went, I kept saying, look at these mountains, look at these mountains. And my German friends kept saying, shut up, Alex, keep pedaling. But I was like, but look at this, but look at this. Excuse my German accent, that was not very good. I should not do accents again, but you get the idea. I was just couldn't believe these mountains. And if you haven't seen them, the scale that they exist is much larger than you can tell in these images. But they're basically, to me, like these huge, huge sculptures everywhere you look. Instead of mountains, they look like sculptures to me. Next image, please. So this is a sculpture roughly inspired by these, by the mountains. They originally were inspired by walking down Lexington Avenue and seeing natural crystals. Remember the pictures of the natural crystals? Seeing these natural crystals and saying, oh, I wonder if I could make a natural crystal, but make it out of glass. So from the idea of these natural crystals that someone digs up, but make one out of glass myself. So I started making these natural crystals, and then I started putting them together, and they're starting to look like a mountain range. They're starting to remind me of the Dolomite Mountains. So this is kind of up to my recent work we're getting here. Next image, please. So here's another image of the Dolomites. And again, it's hard to see, but if you look really closely, there's a hotel being built way back in the back. And there's a construction crane that you know because you see downtown Asheville. And the mountains just make it look like it's nothing. They're really these giant mountains. Next image. So this is the first grouping. Could you go back to the first image? That not that one, but the other Dolomite mountain, the big group. Yeah. So this, these mountains, and then back to the color pieces. Sorry to make you go back and forth. Was the first piece where I was like, okay, it's really starting to look like the Dolomite Mountains. So this grouping all together, to me, spoke like a mountain range. Next image, please. And as you guys know, we live in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then also next image. Accidentally, this sculpture that I made ended up looking like the Chicago skyline, which is where the piece was being shown. So next image. So this is, when I did the multicolored piece that you saw before, I was a little distracted by all the colors. I mean, I like color, but I thought it'd be really interesting to make a Blue Ridge Mountain. So this is my idea of Blue Ridge Mountain. But then looking, if you could go back one, please, to the Chicago skyline, I was like, wow, it looks just like Chicago, which is where I was showing it. And it's one of those things that happened. And I was super excited that this piece was purchased by, again, some really lovely couple that lives in Florida. So I was really excited. This, if you could go back to the piece, please, or the next image. This was one of the largest pieces that I've ever made. Don't remember exactly, but I think it was 7 or 8 feet wide and then roughly 4 feet tall. So when it's all put together, it was one of the largest installations I made. Next image. This is another group. This is the gold group. So just a different color glass. You see the lines in the middle. To me, they're like growth lines, like rings on a tree. So I wanted this idea of growth, and then like crystals. I don't know if you can see the texture at the bottom, but I wanted the piece to look as if it was growing out of the, the stone. Crystals don't just pop out. They usually have somewhere where they're growing. So this idea of growth and movement, I was trying to have these. And another thing about these pieces is I make one sculpture first, and I try to make that sculpture really strong. And then I make another sculpture, and I try to make them all standalone, really good sculptures, and then try to put them together. I think it was a mistake to try to build it all together. So I try to make each sculpture stand on its own, and then I start putting them together. Next image, please. This is the largest group I've made. This one I think is 23 pieces, and this is optical lead crystal. I really, really like the this clear effect. Definitely speaks of ice. And with 5 minutes to go, I'm going to get into how I do my work. So let me know if you have any questions as we go. So my process, again, is subtractive sculpting, but I actually cast glass first, which is additive. I don't dictate how things are installed. The reason there's an image is I ultimately have to find one way where I like it, but I'm a habitually indecisive person. And I know when a grouping seems like it's finished, but I will continue to move them around almost like puzzle pieces. And probably if I had one in my home, I would probably walk by it and move things around every single day. So no, I don't really dictate how exactly it should look. I just need to take one picture. And so I try to make it look where, okay, oh, that looks pretty good right now. And then take a picture, and then it can be moved around. In fact, the first colorful one was in a linear. It's kind of how I saw them, but it actually is installed in the middle of a like 6 foot by 6 foot, or maybe even larger, maybe 12-foot table, a round table. And it's a centerpiece in the middle. And these pieces actually look really, really great in the middle. And they look more like mountains when they're in that format. So I actually love to see them in a round. I just know it's in my studio and whatnot, it's a little harder to do. This is subtractive sculpting, but I make the glass first. So I cast the glass in ovens, and this, if you can look closely, is a fire extinguisher that I cut in half, and then I filled it with glass. The point of this is basically I will melt glass into anything I can find, because I want a block, or using the metaphor as a stone sculptor, I want basically a piece of stone that I can work with. So this is the start, glass into a metal container. And then next image, the glass melts at 1550 degrees. It takes a long time for it to cool. The picture, and this actually isn't my studio. Interesting fact is I lost my insurance policy because of this image. This image was on my website, and somehow my insurance person saw this and said, that looks dangerous, we're gonna drop you. And I said, that's not my studio. I don't have that in my studio. This isn't, and they didn't believe me. Anyway, so I had to find a new insurance. This was Robert Gardner's studio. If you guys know Robert, he was a good friend and was letting me borrow his ovens. My ovens in my studio now are store-bought, and they're URL listed, and they're all much more professional. Anyway, but please don't tell my insurance person, but I think they'll be fine. Okay, next step. I draw it out. So people are asking about the drawing. I always draw on the block of glass and try to figure out what shape. So you can see using a paint pen, drawing the shape. And there's kind of the finished drawing. Well, a work in progress drawing. Next image, please. And so I subtractive sculpting, I cut and carve the shape out. So this is me slowly cutting little kind of feathers, and then I'll chip those out. Next image. This is me grinding. Actually, I think this may be Hayden Wilson, and me taking a picture of him. Hayden Wilson, who I'm not sure if you know, used to be a security guard at the Asheville Art Museum, and now I think has work and was part of the Appalachian Now show. Hayden and I grew up together. He's a good bit younger than me, but we grew up together. And I also should probably mention that I'm on the board of the Asheville Art Museum. So thank you for your support, and thank you for being members. Next image, please. So this, you can see the shape starting to happen. So I cut and ground and carved it. Next, please. I have 1 more minute to finish. This is doing the texture. So I kind of cut at a bias, at an angle, to make, instead of it looking like cut marks, it makes it look more like feathers or grass growing. And that was a happy accident as well, to figure out that if I cut it at an angle, I could get a different shape. Next, please. This is just a picture of me grinding it flat. I basically have one piece of equipment where I can grind things flat, and that's it. Next, please. So this is the finished piece sitting next to another one of my work in progress. I think this was just for the photo shoot. I at that point didn't really work on, I would work on one at a time. Okay, next, yeah, don't tell my insurance agent I'm up on process. So this is masking off. You guys watched the video, and so I talked a little bit about Bernsteining. This is fusing steel to the glass surface. So I mask everything off where I don't want the steel. And then next image, this is me actually, again, I think this is Hayden, grinding the sparks. So I literally grind sparks, and you can see the piece. I'm pointing to the actual piece. I know you can't see my finger pointing to my screen, but if you could move forward again. So you can see that this blue color is starting to turn gray, more opaque. And so that's the start of the steel process. And then this is the finished piece. Although I would say that, anyway, this is basically the finished piece. I think I actually did something a little different. So the final finished piece is, maybe turned out a little different, but that's my process, and I'm 1 minute late. Do videos work on this? Can you play a video? If you want to try to click on this.
Yes, if you tell me what link to go to.
Well, it was embedded in the, it should be embedded in the. Oh,
unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be.
Okay, so this is just a picture of me rusting the glass. And I think it's on Instagram for people that are on social media. You can follow, I think, Alex Bernstein Glass on Instagram and Facebook, or I could also, if there's an email, I can send a video of this. But basically, it's fun to watch the glass patina, and this is an image of the glass, or the steel. When it's first applied, it turns gray, or it's gray, just like new steel, and then I can patina it later. Thank you all so much. Yes, that's it. And please do follow me on Facebook and social media. And thank you for being members of the Art Museum as a board member. I really appreciate it. I think any world-class city deserves a world-class museum, and I'm glad we have one in Asheville. It's been a lot of work seeing the museum grow, and I hope that we can all be safe and find some resolution to Corona and all be able to visit the Art Museum again. But I think it's really wonderful, and I'm super happy to be able to do a presentation like this. It's really been fun, and I think it's great the Art Museum is thinking like that. It was a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. This was really wonderful. I think everyone really enjoyed it. And if you do want to send me the link to that video, I'm happy to send it out when I send the program evaluation to everybody.
Yeah, so, my email or my website is alexbernsteinglass.com, and I do have, you can link to an email there if people have other questions. I'd be happy to answer them if I can, and be happy to show people around my studio again when we everybody gets healthy and we can figure this out. So thank you.
Perfect. You might get a lot of requests for that, I imagine. So
yeah,
I
pretty much you know, I only work with galleries, so I have Blue Spiral, and I don't really have a sign on my road, and people don't recognize it. So I sometimes get lonely, and so I like to have people come visit. As you guys notice, I like talking about my work, so I like having people come visit. And so definitely let's be happy to show you around, hopefully in the near future.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'll send the evaluation with the video soon, and keep being on the lookout for these emails every Monday until we reopen. We'll keep having these member programs for you weekly, and I hope to see many of you again next week. Stay safe, stay well, and thank you again. Have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.